You are now listening to the Fighting Back podcast, and here's your host, Jessica Travis. Welcome to a brand new episode of the Fighting Back podcast. This is a Sidebar episode. This is Patricio, and I am joined by the one and only Jessica Travis. How you doing, Jessica?
Great. How are you today?
A little bit of hiccups, but I'll be all right. Yeah. So today is a pretty important day in this nation's history. It is the 24th anniversary of 9/11.
Yes.
And everything changed after that day. The way we travel, the way we govern, the way we kind of look at things in a sense. And today I kind of want to focus on the post 9/11 laws and what came of that. But before we even do that, where were you? Where were you when the world stopped turning?
So I was a freshman in college. I had just started my first semester of college, and I was at my work in the school office. At that time, everybody listened to the radio in the morning as we were working. And as we listened to the radio, we heard the first plane crash. And of course, I think like a lot of people at the time were like, wow, that's weird. What kind of pilot crashes in to
To
a
a building.
building?
Yeah.
Like, wow, that pilot. And then the second plane crash happened. And that's when everybody freaked out a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
We all left the offices. We went to the group quad, like cafeteria area at the college. Everybody gathered around all the televisions to really watch what was going on and to just try to figure out what was happening. And that early morning hours, and throughout the morning, we really didn't know what was going on. The news didn't know what was going on.
Yeah, it was a normal Tuesday. I was in high school. I was sophomore year, and chemistry class. My teacher, his phone kept going off, and he just kept closing it, and then after the fourth or fifth call, he finally picks it up. He goes aside and then comes running out to turn on the TV. And the moment the TV turned on, we saw the second plane hit, and we're like, "What just happened?" And we were the same way. Classes got canceled. Everybody just kind of just like chilled in the gymnasium, the cafeteria, and I was the kid who brought the boombox. So we're all just listening in, speculating. We don't know what the hell was going on that day until we saw jets fly over us, and we're like, "Oh my God, this is World War III." It was a dark day in our country, and a lot of lives and a lot of things changed that day.
And I think a big part of that day was the unknown, right? So we knew there were some plane crashes and we knew there was some devastation that was happening, but no one really knew at the time what to do with an attack. I mean, the last attack that we had on the United States was Pearl Harbor. And I don't know about you, but I wasn't alive for that.
I was not either.
I had read about it in the history books, but had not really experienced anything like that. So for me and my friends, we had just turned 18. So we were all nervous about what was going to happen next. Were we going to get into war? Was it going to be like Vietnam, where there was a mandatory draft that my friends would be subject to? So I think the big concerns that we had when all this was going on was really the what's next.
Yeah. And I remember just speculation from all the newscasters. Is this terrorist attacks? Is it domestic? Is it abroad? What? No one knew. And for quite a while, like, we had no clue. We were in the dark. And then I remember hearing President Bush's speech, and it was still like we were still in shock over what happened. But I remember when we first had the idea about talking about this episode, and we were going back and forth about the quote. And I want you to talk, because you love this quote.
I really do. So this is a quote by Ben Franklin, obviously during the American Revolutionary War. His quote is simplified: "Those who give up liberty for safety deserve neither." And to me, that really strikes me, because I feel like a lot of times it is human nature when we are attacked or we are threatened. We will oftentimes look to safety, look to protection. And I think that quote really does say that if you're willing to give up your liberty for that safety, for that protection, you don't deserve liberty and you don't deserve safety. So for me, that quote it's powerful and it really gets you to think about what is important and how we react to things.
The attacks of 9/11 brought forth a lot of new laws and a lot of new acts. The one that stands out the most was the Patriot Act. Could you break that one down for us?
So the Patriot Act was enacted in 2001 after 9/11, and it did a lot of things, but I think the biggest thing, the most impactful thing to United States citizens and to our nation's laws was its expansion of the National Security Agency, the NSA, and the ability and the allowance of the government to trace and intercept communication. So prior to the Patriot Act, in order for law enforcement to capture telephone conversations, they had to get a court order.
Mm-hmm.
They had to get a court order specifically saying you're allowed to tap this phone. And in that court order, the scope and the duration was very narrowly tailored to the crime that they were trying to get.
Really?
So the other big thing was once law enforcement got this court order to capture telephones, once the scope and duration ended, they had to notify the parties whose phones were being tapped that they had been tapped.
Oh, you see, Hollywood never told me that.
So, and the other thing prior to the Patriot Act was that police could get what they called a trap and trace, which is basically at the time, which, technology was not what it is now, but at the time they were allowed to basically get caller ID numbers. So they were allowed to get the phone numbers of calls made to and from a device. Kind of like if you remember in the old days when you got your phone bill and it listed out
all
the numbers and how long the phone call lasted. You didn't actually hear what the phone call was about, but you got to see what number it was that you called or that called you.
Yeah, I got in trouble a lot as a kid because I had friends who would move and I would call them and we'd talk for hours on end. And then my mom would get so
she'd
mad.
Get the phone bill and be like, what are all these long distance charges? Right. So before this, they could get this basically trap and trace, this caller ID phone numbers without a court order and without any type of notification, so that they could pull basically your phone bill to see what numbers were calling you or what numbers you were calling. And they didn't have to get a court order and they didn't have to notify you afterwards that they had gotten this information.
So it literally infringed on everyone's privacy.
So this was pre-Patriot Act.
Mm-hmm.
So what the Patriot Act did was it really increased what law enforcement were allowed to do without a warrant. So what it did is it considered that emails and the contents of emails were the same thing as these phone bills.
Oh, wow.
So that a law enforcement could obtain these emails the same way they could obtain these phone bills because they were considered that caller ID, that tap and trace. They also considered voicemails to be the same as these phone bills, and they could obtain those without a court order or without any type of notification.
Wow.
It also allowed for bulk data collection. So there were a lot of things that the government started doing that we really didn't know about until later on as far as data collection. But the Patriot Act kind of allowed increased data collection without the need for a warrant or without the need for notifying the parties that their data was being collected. So moving on a little bit, in 2006, there were the thought came up of, maybe there's this data that's being collected that we don't know about, and that may be infringing upon our constitutional rights. So the ACLU and the Center for Constitutional Rights filed lawsuits against NSA for this bulk data collection, this data collection of individuals. The lawsuits were dismissed for lack of standing. And it really wasn't until 2013, I think, that the public began to understand, or before it was disclosed to the public, as to what was going on. So you remember in 2013, we had Edward Snowden.
The famous whistleblower.
Remember him?
Oh, yeah.
So he leaked information that he said was from the NSA, that disclosure of this data collection that the United States did on their own citizens, right? And it was a really big controversial thing.
Yeah, I remember that, because it's like there's the idea of privacy was just like gone.
It was shattered at that point.
Yeah.
At least to everyday, life. We thought at that point, we're like, oh, somebody can be listening to my phone calls without giving me notice that they are.
And it's like the double-edged sword. It's like, okay, well, if you got nothing to hide, what are you worried about? But at the same time, it's like, we were at a time of war. We didn't know who our enemies were. We didn't know what was going on. So in time of war, it's like it's justified in a sense, right or wrong.
Well, I think whether it's right or wrong is for each individual person to decide. The question is, what happened, right? And I think in 2013, we realized this is what was going on, that the United States was collecting telephone conversations. They were collecting email communications. They were collecting this type of bulk data on United States citizens. So as a result of that, in 2015, the Congress passed the U.S. Freedom Act. And so this act was put in place to try to impose new limits on bulk collection of data. So it was put in place to try to keep this kind of widespread, massive data collection idea that Edward Snowden said was going on in 2013. And this U.S. Freedom Act, in 2020, Congress passed a long-term extension of this act. The question really still remains, and I think there is still, I'm not sure if there's litigation or not going on, but the question still does remain of what kind of data is being collected and stored on a consistent or bulk basis, right? Because the Patriot Act, one of the big things that they did, which the U.S. Freedom Act continued, was the notification requirement was still not implemented.
Wow.
So it's still something where communications can be intercepted by law enforcement without notification to the person.
I'm kind of thinking back to our episode on the Kiss Cam, the privacy. There's so many apps that we use, like, show me one home that doesn't have an Alexa, or a smart device in the home that is voice recognition and connected to the rest of the house itself. Show me one house that isn't connected to Wi-Fi. Like, everything now is connected to a system where we kind of just give away like our privacy, like especially with social media. I talked about how if you read the rules and the rights of the Facebook agreement, you're basically giving away your privacy on that right there.
Well, we already know that subpoenas have been issued and granted for Alexa data and for those smart speakers that are collecting data, and law enforcement has gotten them in different criminal investigations. So we know that the data is collected by these type of smart speakers, and that law enforcement has access to them. We know that law enforcement obtain subpoenas for all of your cell phone data and your cell phone metadata they have access to, and your internet and website and laptop metadata. and Facebook iCloud's account and all the other type accounts. So we know that the data is stored. And we know the data is collected, and we know that law enforcement, when they go through the subpoena power in a criminal case, we are most of the time notified that they're collecting it. I think what we have to think about is, where are those situations where law enforcement is collecting the data and not notifying the individual that they are doing so? I think that is really what we need to be mindful of.
Wow. There have been so many, like I said at the beginning of the episode, so many laws that have been in place because of this, to basically hoping to prevent, another terrorist attack. But this has created like regulatory powers of financial institutions for money laundering. Like, I wanted to touch base on that next step.
Yeah, so a secondary part of the Patriot Act was to create these regulatory powers for the financial institutions. And the goal was to limit or to control money laundering. And what these powers enacted was to strengthen the banking rules against money laundering. It was also put in a lot of requirements that banks had to comply with, that banks had to report transactions, data, information to law enforcement. So when we're talking about that data collection and that law enforcement obtaining that data, part of the Patriot Act said was that the banks had to the banks had to report this data to law enforcement. It was a mandate. It was required. And again, it was reporting without notice to the individual.
I've noticed sometimes when like I step out of like my normal purchasing area. I was at Johnny's the other day, and I'd gone to that ATM to just get some cash, and immediately my transaction got denied. My phone went, my phone was going off. It detected fraud, and it's like situations like that where these banks are collecting all this data, and of course, I'm like, this is me getting the money, but I can see how those kind of actions, that data being collected to be put over to law enforcement for situations like that. It's crazy, but we live in a technological era where literally data runs everything. Data is key in this day and age.
I agree, and I think the more that we are aware of what data is collected. And how it can be used or how it can be disclosed, I think the information and the education that we have about it is what is going to be the power for us.
Jessica, thank you so much for your input. Is there any other areas you want to touch base on since we're talking about 9/11? And
no.
Well, thank you so much for listening, and we will see you guys later. Thank you so much for listening. If you found this episode helpful or informative, don't forget to follow us on social media and share this podcast with your friends. Like, follow, subscribe so you never miss a show, and help others know their rights by spreading the word. Your support helps us keep fighting back. The information provided in the Fighting Back podcast is for general informational purposes only and is not intended as legal advice. Every case is unique and should be reviewed by a qualified attorney who can provide guidance based on the specific facts and circumstances of your case. Listening to this podcast does not create an attorney-client relationship with Fighter Law or any of its attorneys. If you are facing any legal issue, we strongly encourage you to consult with a licensed attorney directly.